Trump's VP pick, JD Vance, is getting backlash for his 2021 cat lady comment on then Fox News host Tucker Carlson's show. And if you need a refresher, here it is.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made. And so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children.
Yikes. Actor Jennifer Aniston, who's refrained from political comments, weighed in, posting on her Instagram story, "Mr. Vance, I pray that your daughter is fortunate enough to bear children of her own one day. I truly can't believe this is coming from a potential VP of the United States."
Alyssa Farah-Griffin, the conservative host on The View, also criticized JD Vance. Let's watch.
The other is this JD Vance clip. I saw it years ago, a couple years ago when he said it, but I am hearing from so many girlfriends, lifelong Republicans, that are so offended by it. Because if you're a woman of about my age or mid-30s, the most common thing that my friends are dealing with is infertility, miscarriages, struggling to get pregnant, wanting to and it not happening, or people who so badly want to get married but they haven't met the right partner yet. How dare you denigrate them and say that they are not as valuable, they don't have as much of a stake in this society?
So who is JD Vance? A recent Associated Press Center survey found that 60% of respondents do not know who he is. Staff writer for The Hill, Taylor Giorno, wrote an article giving a glimpse into Trump's number two. Joining us now to dive into JD Vance is Taylor herself. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So this is someone who is not super well known to the country yet. What did you find when you were doing reporting on this figure?
Yeah, so I'm the business and lobbying reporter at The Hill. I tend to look at how businesses and groups sort of look at these public figures that they're trying to influence in their daily lives. And right now, K Street is really struggling to decode this man who doesn't have an extensive legislative record. He was only elected to Congress in 2022, and he started in 2023. And he has signed on to some bills that we can talk about later that maybe make it even more complicated because he doesn't fit into this Republican traditional practice that I think a lot of people expect.
Well, because he's simultaneously, he is a former venture capitalist associated with Peter Thiel and kind of the tech world, right-leaning politics and all of that. So you might think that makes him a very business-friendly or sort of free market type Republican. However, he also has been partnering with Democrats on some antitrust issues, breaking up big tech. He has had Lina Khan, the very Democratic, very progressive chair of the Federal Trade Commission, who has been, waging war on Amazon and Apple and everybody. He said she's doing a great job. So is there a through line in his philosophy, or is it just it's hard to tell?
Well, I think in order to maybe get a sense of JD Vance, I maybe jumped the gun talking about sort of when he burst into the public space in 2022, but he didn't burst into the public space just in 2022. He actually really came to the national stage in 2016 when he published his book, Hillbilly Elegy, which really became popular actually among sort of like the quote unquote liberal elite, because he talked about his upbringing in suburban Ohio, but also spending time with his grandparents in Kentucky. And he talks about growing up amongst poverty and addiction. And he got a bit of blowback from that, basically for suggesting that people from Appalachia, which is where I'm from, are lazy. And so he sort of came up with this populist, pulled myself up by my bootstraps, but he went to Ohio State. He then went to Yale Law School. And then you're right, he went from basically being this man from suburban Ohio, tough upbringing, to being a venture capitalist, working with Peter Thiel, who's a big Republican donor, and then eventually going on to found his own firm before eventually making a bid for Congress and getting into the Senate.
Now, he's been kind of called out for selling out the working class of America. I grew up in a working class family. A lot of our family struggled with addiction. His story is one that I think I relate to, a lot of people relate to. I don't relate to him selling out to venture capitalists and big business. He's been called Shillbilly effectively as a nickname now. We had Pete Buttigieg sort of making a meal out of this whole thing on Bill Maher, saying rich guys are looking out for rich guys. That's why Silicon Valley, is supporting JD Vance, because it sounds like, although he grew up working class, he's not really fighting for them now. But I think a different facet of this is the cultural aspect, and that actually alienating women is something that's bad for business. If they have, a lot of businesses donating to this campaign and being associated with JD Vance, it's a bad look. And so he's now been quoted saying a year before a Senate campaign that actually parents who have children should be able to cast votes on behalf of those children. The Washington Post is re-reporting these old statements. Do you see him getting around any of this? There's reports that Trump might replace him. Do you see this being, the end of his political career in some
There
way?
is zero chance Trump is going to replace him.
Zero replace. Even today, he was out there backing Vance, saying, "Oh, even no matter who Kamala Harris picks, or even if she hadn't become anointed as the new Democratic nominee, basically, I was going to always pick Vance all along." So I think that just like any other candidate in a very high-profile position, his past comments and statements are going to be picked over, and he's probably going to be positioning himself in every way possible to walk a fine line. I mean, you even saw him doing that on the RNC stage when he made the speech accepting his vice presidential nomination, basically trying to walk this fine line between saying, I am supporting workers, and also saying, oh, but we need a country that's going to do great things for American business and industry. So the vice presidency is in many ways, until you're called into action, a more ceremonial role. You don't have the direct influence of maybe someone like the president. But I do think, moving forward in the campaign, he's going to probably try to mitigate some of those comments. And no matter what, you can say from a cultural perspective, he did his first campaign rally in Radford, Virginia, which is about 30 minutes down the road from where I grew up. About 1,000 people turned out, and there was a lot of energy in that crowd. And a lot of women included. They were saying, we're girls for Trump, we're girls for Vance. And I do think attaching himself to Trump in this way, who has also made his own controversial statements about women in the past and has clearly overcome them, I don't think he's going to have as much problem as maybe we would think.
Yeah, should he have called Kamala Harris a crazy cat lady? No, obviously not. And I see why some people will be put off by those comments. I think what it reflects is that JD Vance is part of this new national populism on the right, and that one of their kind of tenets is that government policy and really the GOP's focus in the past has not been sufficiently pro-family, and I don't mean that in the kind of Bush era, social conservative family stuff, but is not actually alarmed enough about the economic difficulties of raising a family at this time. That while we have so many things, consumer goods and electronics getting cheaper and more affordable, the labor-intensive things like childcare are getting less and less affordable. And what is the government's plan, or what is Republican plan to deal with that? So when I hear him say things like, people who have children should have more of a vote or more of a voice, I think that's designed to position the GOP as the party that is trying to come up with a solution for the difficulty in raising children today. Not that giving more votes to people with children is the right solution or a constitutional solution, because it's not. But
totally.
So the economic issues in our country is why we have crazy cat ladies, Robbie?
Well, what he's saying is that policymakers have not prioritized, that we want to make it easier. I think everyone wants to make it easier to raise a family in this country, to have children. There are people on the GOP side, but elsewhere too, who are concerned about declining birth rates in America. And if that's a choice people are freely making, that's fine. But if that's because of economic reality, because it's becoming less and less affordable to raise a family, then that is something they think policymakers should address.
Yeah. And it is a tough economic time for many Americans. Coming out of the pandemic, we've lost a lot of savings that a lot of Americans stored up. High inflation, which peaked at 9% year over year in June 2022. It has come down, but it's still pretty hot. It's hotter than the Federal Reserve would like it to be. And Republicans, Trump, Vance, have really jumped on that, saying this is what the Biden and Harris administration have done. And so they can point to the broader issues in the economy, while these comments may be on childless cat ladies being the issue, can go by the wayside, because they're like, no, that's not the big issue. This is the real issue, and it's caused by this administration, despite the fact that, particularly on inflation, the Federal Reserve is an independent body and not influenced by the president.
Now, I have to ask you this last question. Given your focus on reporting, JD Vance has the backing of Silicon Valley in a major way. We've also seen Silicon Valley throw some support behind Trump. I have read some interesting analysis of people who assume this is because a Donald Trump presidency would be inflationary. And that would make people question the value of a dollar. Whether that's legitimate or not is a whole other conversation. But this has been successful messaging from the crypto community before. Right. And so the assumption is that the reason crypto in Silicon Valley is backing Trump is because they create an environment that makes a bigger lane for cryptocurrency. What do you make of that analysis?
Well, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that analysis, because a lot of venture capitalists and businesses in general don't like high interest rates because it makes it harder for them to borrow. I mean, that's why we saw layoffs in Silicon Valley, especially at the beginning of last year. And so anything that's going to drive inflation up and keep borrowing costs high, I don't think is something that maybe those venture capitalists or businesses would really enjoy. However, Trump has sort of been out there touting his support for the crypto community. And when you put that in contrast to Biden, who has sort of put out a framework on digital assets, but also, his SEC chair, Gary Gensler, has been very aggressive in going after a lot of these crypto companies that he thinks are violating securities law. There's a lot of high profile, disputes with Coinbase and Ripple, who are sort of on the forefront of this. And I think that that community really sees maybe Republicans and Donald Trump and Vance specifically as being more favorable to them if they were to take office.
Very interesting.
Taylor, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
More Rising right after this.